Hi, hello, selamat malam. Thanks again for coming to ISQA meetup. Gimana? Snacknya okay? Refreshingnya okay? So, who here is a member of ISQA department? Awesome. So, about 80% of us are members. So this is our first meetup of the year. We've grown into 1,300 members from zero, and we're going to have another meetup in Bandung on 27th of January. That will be our first meetup in Bandung, and also the first of Bandung chapter for ISQA. So if you guys are interested in participating, we have more information on that in our meetup page. And yes, please join us at Bandung on 27th of January. So we have a special speaker today. His name is Anand Bagmar. He has about 17+ experience in the IT industry, and a portion of that is in quality assurance. He has spoke in a lot of conferences, and currently he's a director of Software Quality Evangelist in Livid. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Anand. And yes, welcome Anand.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. It is a great honor and pleasure to be here, and thank you everyone involved to make this last-minute meetup possible. I was hoping to be more seating with everyone and learning instead of being the one speaking, but we'll have to do what's the best possible. So very quickly, I want to understand first, is everyone a tester or a QA in this group? Yes. Who is not a QA in the group? What is your role? Development? Excellent. Any managers, leads, anyone? Okay, yeah. Great. We have some, that's good. Anyone who is not working on Agile projects? Everyone is working on Agile? Oh, this topic is already over, that's good. We can talk more freely. Okay, so what I thought I would share experiences with is on the topic of what is Agile testing and how does test automation help in that, or what role does test automation play in that. Anyone who is not doing test automation over here? A few people focused on functional testing? Yes? Yeah. How many of your teams are not doing test automation at all? Everyone doing some form of automation? Yes? Okay, great. So I'm going to skip this slide. My Twitter ID is there. On my blog, you can read whatever I share over there if you are interested. But more important, right? What is it that you expect from this particular session or this meetup? Why are you here on a busy day? Anyone? 30 years. Sorry? 30 years. 30 years. Okay, what do you mean by that? My experience, okay, sharing that aspect. Okay. What else?
Best practices.
Sorry?
Best practices.
Best practices on?
Agile testing.
In Agile testing, okay. We'll talk a little bit about that. Anyone else? What would you expect from the next hour and a half, 2 hours?
Just your perspective on the testing industry, since you have so many experiences already.
Okay. Perspective on testing industry. We'll try to include some aspects of that. Okay. So first thing, right? Agile testing. Best practices on Agile testing. There is no such thing like Agile testing in the first place. Problem solved. So no best practices required for it. Okay. Agile testing is a myth. There's no such way. There's agile way of working and how different roles, different practices come together to achieve that goal, to achieve that objective. There's no such thing like agile testing per se. It just sounds catchy. That's why I also used it. Okay? So let's quickly understand why agile in the first place, right? Any organization has got 3 primary objectives. Can you relate to that? Make money and or provide value to someone. Do that on time, otherwise you will not be able to achieve those objectives. And if your quality is poor, then regardless of what you do, you will not be able to achieve your objectives. You will not be able to make money or provide value. Another reality is that we are really spread out for various reasons because of globalization, cost, and various other factors that everyone really knows. There is nothing new in that aspect, right? Each organization eventually grows out and does different things. And it doesn't need to be really spread across the world, even if you're moving to a next building or across different floors. If the teams are distributed in that fashion, not sitting together, means you have to evolve your way of working to support that aspect. If everyone is sitting in this room and working together, it becomes much more easier. But the minute you spread out, you cannot see the other person clearly. You have to think about different ways how you will collaborate and get value out of it. Okay? So these are realities, nothing related with agile. So, okay? So what really is agile? Can anyone say what is agile? Everyone is working on agile projects or in the agile way or doing agile testing. What is agile?
Ability to respond to market changes quickly.
Ability to respond to market changes quickly. Yes. Anyone else? Come on, everyone is working in agile. We should not have refreshments before. I think everyone is sleeping. Okay. Anyone else wants to share what is that? Yes. Fast pace for what? For development. Okay. Is it just a way for business to say that, okay, I can get more requirements in more frequently? For certain things, yes. Okay, that's the honest answer. Okay. In many cases, it comes down to someone hearing, yes, I heard something new called agile and let's do agile. Unfortunately, that's a reality as well, right? Many organizations just change direction because that's a new way of working. Okay. But regardless, right? There is a lot of value in this thought process. Anyone not read the Agile Manifesto? Everyone has read the Agile Manifesto? What are the 10 tenets of Agile? It's a trick question. There are only 4. Okay, so let's quickly go through that, because if we don't understand the aspect of Agile, the fundamentals of Agile, there's no point talking about how will we test better in Agile projects. Okay, so first thing, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Can we relate to that? The focus is on how do we collaborate better, how do we interact better to get value for whatever that really means as quickly as possible, instead of focusing on strict processes and tools related to that aspect. That is important, but the emphasis in Agile is more on individuals and interactions. Okay, tenet 1. Second one, working software over comprehensive documentation. How many of you over here spend time in documenting what you're going to test, how you're going to test that, what test cases are going to be there? And we are talking this just from a testing perspective. There's so much more in terms of requirements, design, again, value in everything. But the focus is on how can we get working software quickly, which serves as a live documentation of the product instead of writing something which will change very quickly. Okay, so focus on the working software. Third aspect, customer collaboration over. Can anyone think? Contract negotiation. Particularly true in case of service organizations than product companies, but it is very important. Even within product companies, within different teams, right? Your focus should be more on how can I really collaborate better to achieve the end result, instead of just thinking about what is the contract that I'm supposed to share with this particular team in terms of APIs or product or interface, whatever that might be. You have to work in a collaborative way to achieve the end goal, not just focus on the contract side of things. Okay. Last bit, responding to change over. Come on, someone. Everyone is working in Agile. Or following a plan. Plans are important, but how can you quickly iterate, get feedback, keep iterating over what you are building in terms of providing value? Otherwise, what you end up doing, you have planned for work to be done for 6 months. After 6 months, assuming no slippages in dates, you will figure out what was built and delivered is not really providing value. So as a result, all that effort has gone waste. And then there's a change request, whatever else that requires to be done. Instead, if you say that I'm going to do working, get incremental pieces of software available and working, I'm going to collaborate, I'm going to interact better, and hence, as a result, whatever is being delivered, we get immediate feedback and respond to that saying, yes, I'm on the right track, or I need to change direction and maybe update my requirements or the design or the actual expectation, what the customer needed or the user needed was different and we need to change that direction. So this is what Agile really says, right? To focus on these 4 basic principles of ways of working. What are you trying to deliver? And then the rest will follow. The rest means there are 12 principles that are derived from the 4 tenets. To achieve the 12 principles, there could be hundreds of practices from all different role perspectives that teams can choose to adopt to achieve these objectives. So there is no such thing like a best practice. A best practice is in the context of what is working well for the team to achieve the goal. If you choose the wrong practice, there's again nothing like a wrong practice. A practice that did not work in context of a team, you have to change that. You have to evolve into getting better at those aspects. Okay? So we focus on responding to change. Now, as a result of Agile Manifesto, just because we like creating new things like Agile testing, there's also Agile Testing Manifesto that me and my colleagues, when I was back at ThoughtWorks, we had come up with. We said, okay, let's do something different with this aspect as well. Okay, so if the 4 tenets of Agile Manifesto are clear, what does it mean from a testing perspective, a quality perspective, when working on Agile projects? So first thing is about collaborative ownership over detached objectivity. How can the team together, and the team is devs, QAs, business analysts, product owners, product management, dev manager, all the roles that you can think about, together take ownership of that quality and deliver to that aspect instead of saying, this is my work, this is yours. Okay, that is one. Second is targeted automation instead of widespread anti-regression. How many of us work on projects in testing that when we say, okay, we have to do a release, I'm going to go through the hundreds or thousands of test cases and manually just execute them, or I'm just going to run the automation for the sake of running. Instead, the focus, because it's such a fast moving piece of code, you have to have the right types of automation in place in order to allow the team to move fast. And that means the typical practice of doing regression testing before release reduces substantially. Okay? So focus on targeted automation. third thing, which is a very, very essential aspect, is about defect prevention versus defect detection. How many of us are in the testing field because we love finding defects or breaking products? And no harm in saying yes. I used to be one of them. Okay? But that cannot be the only objective. The objective has to be, as QAs, how can you really work with the team to say there should be no defects in this product? Well, can you really say there can be 0 defects in a product? I would say no, right? But how can you ensure whatever you do in terms of working together with different roles, or doing testing, or doing automation, or whatever other activities might be there, how can you prevent defects from coming into the product instead of having to say, I found so many defects, or customers reported so many defects? That whole thought process needs to change. And this by far is one of the biggest shifts that from a testing perspective, you have to think about from Agile context. The biggest value that Agile is giving from a testing perspective is this. By the way, does anyone have got goals, annual or whatever goals, to say how many defects you should be finding every day? Have you heard of such goals, by the way? Yes? That completely changes. Your goals are gone for a toss with this approach. So focus on preventing defects instead of finding defects later on. The last bit is focus on exploratory testing instead of pre-scripted or testing that you think about as test cases that have been documented necessary. Okay, I'll give you an example. If you have to test this clicker, the first few things that come to mind are your test cases, right? What you end up doing as you read a requirement, you understand more about the requirement, you will start thinking about these test cases and writing it down. The minute you write it down, you have pigeonholed yourself in a certain way. You are thinking only about that aspect. By the time you're spending writing out those test cases, you potentially have missed out about many more scenarios that you could have thought of. Doesn't mean writing test cases down is bad. The level of detail that you need to write it down is the question over. Okay? So you definitely need to have a structured thought process when you're testing. What things am I going to test in this aspect for this requirement? What other things related to the requirement potentially might need to be retested again? And you have to make some mental note out of it. That mental note, you put it down either on paper as bullet points, or you put it in Excel or some test case management tool. The more lean and simple you keep it, the better it is. Why? Because the more expensive documentation you create, you might not be the one who is going to end up testing it anyway. The other person may not understand exactly what you meant by the documentation anyway, and will still end up testing whichever way he or she wants. So what's the value in that? Put in minimal detail in terms of what are the scenarios or test cases you would want to test when it comes down to that point of time. And then you focus more on what else do I need to cover, which might not have been written down. That is the key aspect. Because as you start exploring the application, the product under test, you start working with it more and more, you might come across so many countless scenarios that you would have missed writing it down in the first place. Mind you, exploratory testing is not ad hoc testing that I'm randomly going to do something. It is a very structured and thought process required for that aspect. You need to understand the product, the domain really well. You need to understand what has changed in the product from the last time you tested it so that you can focus on the incremental bits. It's a very structured and involved way of testing, not to be confused with ad hoc testing. Okay? So focus on exploratory testing. And as a result of all these tenets, right? Defect prevention, targeted automation, exploratory testing, you start thinking about, okay, how can I really apply this in my way of working? How can I apply this in my teams? You start thinking of it. Okay? With me so far?
Yes.
Sleepy?
No.
No? If yes, we can come down and take a job over here. Okay? So if we know the tenets now or the principles of what agile testing means, let's get down one level deeper into how would it really translate into way of work. Okay. So here are some of the principles and practices when it comes down to agile testing, what we can actually use on this. So what is the primary objective of testing? Why do we test? Anyone? Everyone is doing testing here. Yes?
For the products to our customer.
Sorry?
Good products to our customer.
To deliver good products to our customer, right? Absolutely. And what it really means is to ensure quality software goes out from idea to actual implementation for the user, right? The user doesn't really know what the idea was. They just see the value. And if they like the value, they will use it. If they don't, they will not use it. They'll move on. So for these objectives, here are some of the principles that matter. We spoke about finding defects versus preventing defects. In the non-agile way, prior to the agile way of working, maximum focus used to be on after the requirement cycle, design cycle, development cycle, we'll get a chunk of time where testing needs to happen. So maximum focus was on finding defects, very little focus on preventing defects. Preventing defects meant a QA involvement in the requirements phase, in the design phase, and development phase anyway, who cared about that, right? So very little involvement in terms of preventing defects, maximum time spent on finding defects. That completely needs to flip. We still need to test for finding defects in the system, in the product. But what are the different activities that we need to get involved in preventing it? That is what matters. To do that, we need to understand how do we build quality into a product. Okay? So what it means is, I hope this is readable from the back. Yes? Yeah? Okay? So as a QA, you need to pair with a business analyst or a product owner to think about is the requirement itself right in the first place. Why have you come up with this requirement? What value is it going to provide to the user? A QA working with a business analyst or a product owner to refine those requirements and think correct, validate the requirement itself. A QA working with a user experience person from a design perspective, experience perspective, to make sure the user will really be able, the consumer, the end user of your product, will really be able to use this application correctly without getting confused or getting the most value out of what has happened. Of course, the QA working with the dev to make sure that the devs are doing the right type of implementation, they have the right type of tests written, unit tests, integration tests, and they are sticking with what the requirement is and not just writing additional code for the sake of it. So QA working with a dev is also very important to build a quality product. The QA working with a stakeholder to say this is what we have implemented and this is why it is the right thing, or these are the gaps in what the implementation needs to be to achieve value for the end user. So QA has to work pair with a stakeholder as well. And of course, DevOps is extremely essential aspect of the way of working for teams now. How can I get the code pushed from dev machine to one environment to the other and eventually to production at the click of a button, if at all, instead of manual configuration changes or deployments required. And that becomes very essential because a DevOps role itself or a deployment role itself might not know what it means to get an environment set up correct. The data required or whatever is required of that aspect, right? So it is important. So now we have clearly increased the role of a QA from just testing to do 5 other more types of activities, right? Easy, right? Is anyone doing this already?
Yes.
How are you achieving all these 6 different activities?
So first, QA is responsible to help GO like verify the definition of done is correct and complete. And based on that, basically we put on the story the test scenarios in advance, so that the developer actually understand what we are going to test. So that's one method. That's probably one way we do the QA definitions, so that the developer can know in advance, like the limit of the testing, so that there is less fixing cycle.
Excellent, man. Thank you for sharing that, right? So clearly you're not just doing one additional thing, you're doing two additional things, right? One in terms of QA and be a business analyst pairing in terms of requirements, is that complete? And QA and developer working together in the sense of sharing those scenarios, what exactly is in scope, out of scope, to the developer so they can implement it correctly as well, right? So you're not just doing one thing, you're doing two additional things than just testing, right? So that's good. But you still have 3 more to go. Okay? As QAs, do we have a lot of time to test? How many of us are saying, oh, I'm all done, there's nothing else to be done for the release? That's another myth, right? So if we are already so busy, how can we get from just doing testing or doing 3 activities to doing 6 activities? These are 5 plus actual testing, right? Does that question come to mind for anyone? That question would have come to my mind. What this means is, it's not really a QA working with each of these different roles. It is for each of these different roles to have a testing mindset as well. And that testing mindset is developed by a QA working with different roles at different points in time. So eventually, a business analyst would not really need a QA working with them every time for each and every bits of details. A QA giving input to business analysts and business analysts thinking about that, expanding on that is valuable. Likewise, QA working with user experience or with developer or with DevOps or with stakeholders. It's a mindset about quality that each other role needs to develop. And that's how you get to collaborative ownership of the quality. It's not just about QA being the owner of quality or QA being the gatekeeper of quality. That's not the case anymore. If anyone tells me QA is a gatekeeper and you need to sign off, I said, I am not going to sign off. Why should I as a QA take responsibility for someone's poor requirements or someone's poor implementation? Together, we work and we will solve this problem. But that means accountability, ownership, responsibility also has to be shared. If problems happen in production, it's not QA's neck on the line, it is the team's neck on the line. What did you do as a team to make sure these problems do not happen? Or what are you going to do as a team to make sure these problems do not happen again? Right? It is always a team effort. So that is very important about how are you going to build quality into a product, right? Everyone, and that's the reason why I asked that question initially, what are the different roles in the audience right now? Because each role in this team has a part to play in the quality and help build a quality product. Okay? So what that means is testing does not mean testers. Okay? It is a team responsibility. And that is very, very important to do. To help the team take on this responsibility, QAs have to do that additional bit of explaining, working with different roles to make sure they understand the importance of doing this aspect. And that's why the QA plays a larger part in making this happen, but each other role of the team needs to get involved in making that is correct. Okay? The other aspect is about quick response, fast feedback, right? Because if you do not get quick response, fast feedback, you don't know what has really happened. Something that was working earlier, you would not know at what point it stopped working or it started behaving differently. And to get quick feedback, automation plays a huge role on agile teams, because in 1 week sprints or iterations, 2 or 3, whatever that cycle might be, you want to be releasing to production or getting that piece of software which is done to your users as quickly as possible. And if you want to do that on a very small cycle, you need to get feedback about the quality of the product also very quickly. Otherwise, you'll end up testing manually every time for the same things again and again. Okay? You also have to think about optimizing business value, right? You have to think about how are you going to set up your processes, help your people on the team, and how are you going to use technology in the right way to optimize the end value for the team internal as well as the value of the product external as well. You don't want to be following processes and practices just for the sake of it. You have to optimize those aspects. Do I really need a test plan? Do I really need all the test cases written down in a specific format every time? Or can you make it simpler that gives the team more time to work on other very interesting aspects of the product? And likewise, from a development perspective, there might be other aspects. Requirements perspective, there might be other aspects to consider. But overall, as a team, we need to think about, is there any leakage in the process that we have in place? How can we optimize that? And that becomes a very essential aspect. The continuous retrospection and evolving of these processes and practices is a very essential way of working of Agile. Okay. So as a QA, we have potential to wear various hats. As a BA, PM, product manager, project manager, iteration manager, DevOps as well, while working with other roles. And these are aspects which are typically not thought of from a testing perspective, right? But as a QA, you can add a lot of value to these different roles. Okay. Any questions so far? Any thoughts? Yes?
About how to, you said that you have
you said before that as a QA, we have to put QA mindset to the BA, UI designer, and other. How we can do that?
Oh, very good question. So how can we get a QA mindset in different roles? It takes time. Interaction and collaboration. Working together is the key. So as he correctly mentioned, right? QAs would work with the business analyst when the stories are written. Does that include all aspects of the story? Are the acceptance criteria correct over? Do we have what is in scope and out of scope? Right? So slowly, steadily, you keep working with the business analyst, asking them these questions, and the requirement quality becomes better. Business analysts would start thinking better in that sense to say, yes, I need to think about last time a QA had told me that you have to consider this one aspect in the requirements side. I need to make sure that is incorporated going forward as well. So the more you work together with different roles, they would start understanding you also. From a testing perspective, what type of questions are you asking? So if we have to work together, if I'm, let's say, playing the BA role and you ask me a question once, next time for another story, you ask me a similar type of question again, and you consider this aspect. Third time, the minute I see you, I know what your question is going to be. Right? It might not be the same thing, but I'll remember the question that you asked me the last time. And I'm going to incorporate that as I'm building out that story. Likewise with user experience or with devs, when you're working with different roles, your interactions, it takes time to build that trust. But the more you interact with each other, the more you will start trusting each other. And developers will also very openly welcome that feedback and say, oh, you are sharing test scenarios with me upfront, which means you're not going to be filing defects against filing. Or you will not be pushing the story back to dev every time, depending on what process you follow, right? And that means they start trusting you more. They'll ask you for input more. The third story, when you're working together, to say, hey, can you please share the scenarios upfront before I start developing? Because it is less work for them after that, right? So you have to help each other in understanding the limitations, the constraints, and the thought process that different roles go through. It's not that QA knows everything. The QA asks a lot of questions, understands risks better, because they're looking across the board, not looking at very specific requirements, right? Or specific implementation. And that subject matter expertise, when you interact with different roles, with a testing mindset helps others as well build that testing mindset. Does that help?
Okay, thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah.
Basically, that decide one of the problem is basically about metric. Like it's kind of like difficult to argue. Like right now I'm trying to use like faster iteration as a metric, like comparison, like from before we do things that way, and after we do things that way, that we deliver like we deliver with higher velocity. But it's kind of like difficult to assign that the value is contributed from the way QA works. So how to resolve that metric problem?
Metrics is always a complex problem. And the best way to resolve it is not to use it. But that is easier said than done, right? Because you need to know if you're on track in some fashion and if you're actually providing value. So finding the right metric again depends on team by team, what really works for them. But eventually you have to think about what is the value I'm providing as a product to the end user, and how are you going to measure that value? That becomes an important metric. If you say that you are adding a new feature in your application, in your product, which is going to help solve a certain problem or help better engagement of your user with your product, how are you going to measure that? And that becomes a very important metric to say, have you done whatever it takes? Who cares whether it is agile or waterfall or sprints or whatever else? What is the value you are delivering to the end user? And are you able to achieve that aspect, what your aspiration was? That is one thing. But still internally, you need to figure out certain different things, what will help you move fast, right? The number of defects reported, that goes for a toss. Why? Because our focus is on preventing defects. How can you count the number of defects you have prevented? It's easy to count after the fact. So you need to move away from that aspect. Velocity, it works up to a certain level, but then eventually it's like a game. If the team figures out that how can I show more velocity while still doing less, it's easy to rig, right? So velocity also helps to a certain level, but it's again for the team to start thinking in one way more than anything else. Eventually, it still comes down to the stories or the functionality that I said I will be able to deliver in time. Have I been able to do that with the correct definition of done for each story? And that definition of done is very important, how you set it up. What type of unit test coverage that is expected, integration test, function test, performance, security, whatever else comes along the way, right? So these are some interesting dimensions to think about when it comes to metrics. So many a times you get forced to use certain metrics because the people asking for it or stakeholders asking for it probably don't know any other better way of measuring how well the team is doing or not, or how well the value is being delivered or not. So many times asking more questions about how will this metric help you? What problem are you trying to solve? How is this metric going to help you? And many a times you might come up with different ways to say, what if I give you an alternative number or information? Will that help solve your problem? Or give you the information you need, right? Many a times the requirement comes as a superficial requirement. I want to know the defect leakage in production. I want to know the velocity. Understanding what is the reason behind that question is more important. What value are you trying to get out of that? What information do you want? And how will that information help you take the next decision for the team or for the requirement? If, as QA especially, we start understanding these numbers, I think it will add a lot of value. We can think of better, different ways of getting those numbers quickly enough instead of having to spend a lot of time getting those numbers and creating reports, because then you can again focus on other more interesting aspects in the product. Okay. So I don't have a very direct answer for you, right? Which metrics are valuable or not. Each product, each team would have to decide what really works for them. The definite answer I can give is metrics should be easy to calculate or derive from what is happening. It should be done automatically. You don't have to spend a long time trying to figure out what those reports or numbers really mean. just to give it to someone else. So what minimum you can do in an automated way and real-time fashion so that management or stakeholders can get this information directly, that is the best way. And then they can infer more meaning out of that, right? So that should be the objective. Okay. So since everyone is working in Agile, I think the next part is going to be very straightforward in that sense. There should be nothing new really over here, right? So how do Agile teams really work? So first, there is a story planning session, right? Where business stakeholders, business analysts would really come together and say, this is what I want to achieve as a functionality in the next sprint or whenever that might really be. Based on the story planning session, then the business analyst and tester and actually developers as well, right, would sit together and elaborate that story further, detail it out what you were saying earlier, right? Getting the scenarios, acceptance criteria correct over there, in scope, out of scope. And why a developer is equally required, it's not just about functional requirements, it's technical implementation details as well. What is feasible, not feasible, those aspects, right? That also has to be put into the story so that when development team picks it up, they know exactly what is to be done, how that requirement translates into the technical implementation task. Then before the iteration starts, you would have a sprint planning session or a sprint kickoff per se, iteration kickoff, where you would say, this is what we have agreed as a team, what we'll deliver at the end of the iteration, right? Then the developer and tester would start picking up the story. They would have a kickoff first to say, this is what the scope of the story is. These are the scenarios. We agree what we are going to achieve out of this story. The developer goes off to implement the functionality, and the QAs will go off to start thinking about testing and how will they test it, prepare test data required or update automation based on what is coming up. When the developer says the story is done, there would be a regular PAQA demo, and as a result, also there will be a sign off on the dev machine itself, what we typically call a dev box testing as well, right? You do a dev box testing over there, where the developer now says, yes, as a BA, as a QA, and as dev together, we agree on what the scope initially was set out to be, and we agree with what the implementation has come out. The acceptance criteria is all working, we verified on your machine. Now, developer, you can go and move on to the next story, while the QA is now going to test it in more thorough way. Based on all the other scenarios, the exploratory testing based on risk, based on your predetermined test cases that you had thought of, execute all of that in more details. And then if everything is good, then the story is done and you would demo that, showcase that to the business to say, this is what we have achieved, right? This is straightforward, right? Everyone is working in similar fashion, right? There'll be slight tweaks to this based again on the context of your teams, but typically that's what would happen. Now, what is one way to prevent defects happening? Any of these processes, right? Whether it is writing the story and the scenarios, detailing out the story, you see gaps over there, you're preventing defects by saying, no, we need to cover these aspects as well. So even before a single line of code is written, you have prevented issues coming in with a testing mindset over there, thinking about other scenarios. When you are doing this regular BAQA demo or the sign-off or dev box testing that is there, the developer has not moved on from the story saying this is dev done. If you find any gaps in the implementation, the story is still in dev. Put an observation on the story that is there, a comment, observation, whichever way that works, and tell the developer, fix this and we'll do a sign-off again on this story, a dev box again on this story, right? There is no question of filing defects. You cannot file defects based on something which is not even complete. You're preventing defects. The metric is not about how many defects have you filed. It's about have you tested well enough, given the feedback early enough to the relevant people so that corrective action can be taken. When DevBox is done, when doing story testing, you may end up finding more issues in the implementation. I'm consciously calling it issues, not defects, right? Because the story is not yet done. There is no defect. Something is missing in the implementation. You find that issue, you move the story back to ready for dev, have the same developers fix it immediately before saying, okay, now I'm going to say story is testing done, right? So these practices about just moving the story back it might reduce your velocity. It has an impact, right? Because instead of doing 5 stories, a developer has done only 3. Why? Because 2 of the stories got moved back to ready for dev multiple times. But it is better to complete 3 with good quality than do 5 with patchy quality. And that should be the focus of the team. How can you get to that definition of done and do it thoroughly before the team moves on to pick on something else? Okay? Clear? Anything different you guys might be doing in this way of working? The same? Okay. Let's move on, right? So we understand Agile, we understand the testing principles that is there. We understand the typical life cycle, how the story moves in Agile world. As a QA, what does that mean? I like to call it as the 3 lives of a QA in Agile. Can you think about the 3 lives, what that represents? Anyone? The first one is the past. You have to support as a QA what has happened in the past iterations or the past sprints. You might have gone live to production with that change or not, but as subject matter experts, you have to end up supporting that in terms of production issues or anyone asking questions around it. So the context is always there about what has happened in the past. As a result, you're also going to focus on, based on that past, how does it affect my present? A QA needs to be thinking about how am I going to test the stories that are there in the current sprint or iteration and get it done the best possible way. Okay. So in the past, the way you would focus on is in terms of being part of retrospectives, supporting prior iterations. And then when it comes to the present, you would have various different activities in terms of iteration planning that would be there, in terms of actual story testing, whether it is manual testing, exploratory testing, testing for NFR, performance, security, whatever else it might be, and doing automation as well. Automation, again, I break it up into 3 classic parts, right? Implementation, maintenance, and execution. These are 3 very distinct activities, and all are equally important. One cannot exist without the other, okay? And being part of showcases as well. So there's a lot of things that a QA needs to do in the present while supporting the past. But this is only 2 of the 3 lives. The third one is the future. You always have to think about what is going to be coming up next and how is the past and present going to affect that. Okay? And you would be involved in the future in terms of backlog grooming, which would be in terms of detailing the stories that I had shown earlier, right? The scenarios, those aspects. The backlog grooming becomes an important part, helping in prioritization from a testing or implementation perspective. Having the testing input on that is very, very important. And story analysis would be there. Thinking about test strategy as well is very important. I've been doing testing in a certain way so long. Based on these new functionalities, does that need to evolve? Does that need to change? Or do I need to do something different about it? Right? Piece of cake, right? It's easy. We've been doing it for so long. Okay? So what does this really mean when it comes to the way of working, wearing various different hats, collaborating with all these different roles in the teams, while doing your core activity of testing and living the 3 lives? And that's when it comes down to thinking about what capabilities and skills as QAs do we need to grow to help support this. Okay? So the main question that we need to ask as QAs is, which I'm guessing we already do, right? There's nothing changed in this part, is are we building the correct product and are we building it correctly? You see the difference in the 2? Yes. One without the other again is of no value to the organization, to the business. Building the right product and building it correctly is what is going to deliver value to your user. And to help in that, we need to think about various different capabilities that as QAs we need to build. Okay? One is about bridging the communication gap. You have to work with so many different stakeholders. You need to find a way, how will you relate to different roles as quickly as possible and build trust with them so that the collaboration becomes easy. Once collaboration becomes easy, sharing of information, however bad news it might be, becomes easy as well, because you started trusting each other, the information that you provide. Okay, very important. Second is thinking about the continuous delivery aspect of it. How can I get moving faster and release to production or to my end users faster as quickly as possible with confidence? That is very, very essential. Okay? As a result, we need to be doing coaching as well. I need to tell the developer why me sharing a test cases with him or her is very important, so that it will help the developer implement better. Or coaching other QAs if required, how to test better. Various different aspects, right? Coaching becomes very important and very implicit way of working for the QA, especially in Agile. You have to start enabling teams as well. You cannot become a bottleneck for testing. With collaborative ownership, you enable others. If you know the scenarios, can you start testing it and not wait for me to be done? Various aspects around that. Okay. Risk identification, raising, and mitigating is always been very essential aspect of the QA role. Nothing changes here. In fact, it becomes more profound in the Agile context because code is changing so quickly. As new requirements keep coming in, something which was not fully baked in the earlier iteration, if it is changing immediately drastically, it's a risk potential. Right? So as QAs, we need to think about what the impact of this change is really going to be. If done or not done, we need to be in control of that, understand that. And if we understand, we should be able to raise it to the right stakeholders so that corrective action can be taken. Prioritization in terms of which stories should be implemented or not, which defects should be fixed or not, or it's okay to defer certain defect fixing for later aspects, later iterations, either is fine. And we need to be understanding the scope and impact of all these decisions very well. In some cases, we might need to push for certain changes to happen sooner than later because of what next set of stories are going to be coming in, whether it's from testing perspective or development perspective. So these are very important. Facilitation. If the team, all the different roles are not aligning together, as a QA, can you get them to sit down together in one room and facilitate discussions around what is going on, why is that impacting the team in a negative way or positive way, and take corrective or better actions going forward. That is very essential again. Thinking about tech debt from a product as well as testing perspective, understanding that is very crucial. Why? Because if you understand from a development perspective what tech debt exists, tech debt could be my code coverage for a particular critical module is not as high as is required. What is the impact of that? What can be done to fix it? Which means I know what the tech debt is on the dev side, and I need to raise the risk because I understand the impact of that not being addressed soon enough. Likewise, from an automation perspective, if we need some major changes in the framework for whatever reason, if that is not addressed well, if the management or teams are not giving the automation folks enough time to make those changes, what is the impact going to be of that? So understanding tech debt is very crucial. You cannot avoid tech debt, and you should not. Certain tech debt you need to take on consciously, but there has to be proactive action of how you're going to address it as well at the right point in time. Okay? And of course, there'll be things around do any trainings or get involved in sales aspects. These are various different roles that the QA can get involved in and do in terms of understanding the product better, understanding the users better, and helping the team do many more things. Okay? In terms of skills, I'm preaching to the choir over here. We know we need, first of all, a testing mindset. Most important thing, right? If a QA doesn't have a testing mindset, no one else can. You have to think from a critical aspect, not necessarily breaking the product aspect, but a critical aspect as well. That becomes very important. Thinking about understanding the domain, doing proper functional analysis and actual testing itself. Just having a testing mindset Coming up with scenarios is not enough if you cannot test it well enough, right? That is going to be crucial. Thinking about process improvements. What I spoke about, the build, optimize curve, right? Optimize business process value. That is very important aspect again. How can you think about what changes in process will help? Remember, process has to be an enabler for the team, not a blocker for the team. Process has to help the team move faster, not to slow it down just for the sake of it. So how can you think about making the process lean and simple? Use the right practices and tools and technology to help the team move faster. That should be your goal. Thinking about the defect management. All said and done, defects are part of the software lifecycle. You are focused on preventing defects, but then thinking about how are you going to manage the defects that still come into the picture. What next are you going to do with that? That is very crucial. Then various different aspects about NFRs, security testing, performance testing, accessibility, usability, that becomes very important. It is very essential for QAs to do showcases because you are the pseudo product owner for that product, right? There's a product owner, there's a business analyst, but then from an engineering perspective, there is a QA who has helped build that particular capability to solve the business problem or the actual requirement. So a QA doing the showcases is very important because it again identifies gaps potentially in what was understood to be implemented versus what has been implemented. Developers should also be doing showcases for that matter, right? It's not just QAs because developers are used to speaking only technical language in most cases. They need to understand really what business problem they are trying to solve. And it's a skill that can be grown and evolved into. So it's very important. Okay. Automation again is a very key skill that as QAs we need to have. One is about actually contributing to getting automation better and extending that. And second could be, even if I cannot write code, can I understand it enough to say what are the gaps in my implementation from test case implementation perspective for automation, and how can we bridge that gap? So automation or technology is a very essential aspect of a QA role anyway going forward. Okay? User acceptance testing might be essential in some context, and at the same time presentation we spoke about that, right? So easy, right? There's just a few things that as QAs we need to have in the Agile world.
A few?
The 3 lives and the skills and capabilities around that. Right? Everyone doing that already? Who is not doing that? Okay. So what does this mean, right? I got asked this question many a times a few years ago at least. What is the career path of a QA? And I think it's a very different dimension, but I want to share that thought process over here. The skills and capabilities that we spoke about, I think these are obvious, right? We need to do these things. Can a single person do all of these things? That becomes a question. Immediate answer probably is no. But then, the analogy I like to use is of a pendulum. If I take a pendulum and the way the pendulum swings, the arc of the pendulum is essentially all the different activities that the QA needs to get involved in. It could be right from, you talk about the shift left, right? Be a QA working more like a business analyst or a quality analyst more than a QA engineer. So working more with business analysts and stakeholders instead of testing directly, right? So it starts from the non-technical aspects of testing to the extreme side of the arc where potentially it is DevOps aspect of it, right? So this whole coverage of what the pendulum covers is all the different aspects of what testing might really mean. So what I would say is as the number of years grow on you in terms of experience, over a period of time, you need to get a breadth of coverage across all these different aspects in some way or the other. That is very essential. That is going to grow, make you grow as an individual, as a quality analyst in the field or a QA engineer in the field. Because you know all the different aspects where a QA can contribute to building a good product. But this breadth of coverage is going to be superficial in most cases. As individuals, you need to find out what is your core strength, your true aspirations, and pick that aspect and get deep into that side. So for example, if you say security testing is someone's true aspiration and interest, get various levels of expertise into that security testing while having a good understanding of the other aspects of testing, right? If you say automation, automation itself is a huge field, whether it's automation on desktop or web or mobile or IoT, machine learning, AI, whatever else it might be. What aspects interest you, get to good levels of expertise and mastery in that over a period of time. But do not ignore the other aspects. Otherwise, you will become very narrow focused. The other aspects, you need to have enough understanding to have good conversations, ask the right questions, but then leave it to the experts of that specific aspect to take it to the next level. But what that would do is you can get very comfortable in any situation you get into as a tester, as a QA, and provide value, provide deep value in your area of expertise, and provide decent value in other aspects as well. And that's how I would look at the skills and capability circles that we drew, right? So many different aspects. Think about what is it that is of true interest to you, what you would love to do. Focus on those aspects. From a beginner, become a learner, from a learner, become a master, whatever those levels might be. The other aspects, do not ignore them completely. And that will take you far. That's what at least I think about. Okay? So let's look at some practices or tips and tricks around this aspect as well. Can you think about one practice that makes the team successful? We spoke about so many. Trust. Trust is one. What else? But is trust a practice? It helps implement the practices better, probably. What practices? Sorry? Communication. Okay. Communication is also good, open, collaborative communication, right? Honest communication. And trust will help enable that aspect, right? What else?
Innovation.
Sorry?
Innovation.
Innovation. What do you mean by that?
Learn something new.
Learn something new. Okay, that's good. How will it make the team successful in that way? It will help. I'm not saying no, but it probably is a very specific aspect as well. Not a wrong answer, but not exactly the answer I'm looking.
Involvement.
Involvement. What do you mean by that?
Involvement from every aspect of the team.
Involve every aspect of it. Okay. Yes. Right.
Learning from failure.
Learning from failure. Very important. Yes. But again, not the answer I'm looking for. I can keep going till you come up with the right answer. Sorry? What do you mean by cross-functional? A developer can help the QA to test the software. So cross-functional essentially means have all the relevant roles working together as a team to avoid sending something across the wire. Okay, I'm done now, you do something else, right? So you have all the relevant roles working together. Yes?
Empathy.
Right?
Empathy.
Empathy. Okay, how's that a practice then?
Well,
These are qualities, I think, very essential, but it's not really a practice that you would do, right? What would you?
just knowing that all team members are actually doing their best. If you get criticized or something, it's not because they're trying to bring you down, it's because to constructively criticize you.
No, it's a very important aspect. Yes. Okay. I'll give you the answer on this one, okay? Because you'll never get it. So this is best on me. Obvious now, right? This is a practice. The other things are more of soft skills or whatever that one would have. But not wrong in those aspects, but this is the answer I was looking for. Okay? Another question. Now it's getting interesting. Okay. What is a practice that makes a team unsuccessful?
Manual testing.
Sorry? Testing manually. Okay. What else? Sorry? Not proficient. Not practice. Okay. Okay. What else? This is a very easy one. Come on.
No testing?
No testing. Okay. Close enough, but not the answer I'm looking for. What else? Sorry? No open communication. Yeah. Okay.
Working individually.
Working individually. Great, but still not the answer I'm looking for. Sorry? I didn't get that, sorry. Okay. I'll give this one also to you. Does it make sense? Who said yes? Why? Very well said, right? It's like a double-edged knife because it is a successful practice also and also unsuccessful practice. If test automation is done well, it will help the team succeed. If it is not done well, it is just money lost and you're still spending time doing manual exploratory testing again and again, regardless of how much automation has already happened on the team. Right? Who doesn't agree with it? It will be good to know different perspectives. I'm not countering this. Okay? So test automation is something that you really need to understand well, how it is going to help the team move forward. Okay? And the next few minutes we'll spend time talking about that aspect. Okay? So what is test automation? Who does test automation over here? Don't worry, it's not a trick question. Raise your hand. Okay. Few people. I thought there were more people doing automation. Okay, sorry. What is test automation?
Test automatically.
Test automatically. Why? Why? What does it do to the team? Why do you do test automation?
A better test of coverage.
Better test coverage? You could do that the same without automation as well.
To save the time for the
Save time, right? It's an essential aspect, right? If something has to be repeated every time to test the same functionality again and again, you would rather automate it to get quick feedback, right? Obvious in that sense. What does it do to the team? It provides the team a safety net. Any code change a developer is doing, automatically the unit test will run, functional test will run, a build is created, deployed, the UI test would run, performance test would run. With the developer just doing a git push, you get all this feedback automatically. And if the team is doing well, each person on the team is monitoring the build so carefully. Anytime the build breaks, immediately you know it passed last time, it failed this time. That means there's something changed in that incremental time. And you get that quick feedback. It is a safety net for the team. It allows the team to move faster. Right? And that's what automation does for us. So what does automation really mean, right? Has anyone heard about the test automation pyramid? No?
Yeah, you can test.
Some of you have?
Yeah.
Yeah? What does, thank you for pushing his hand up. There's a mic.
Supposed to have like a lot of unit tests at the very bottom, and then as you go up, you'll have fewer and fewer acceptance tests because the unit tests provided the foundation for it.
Excellent.
And so forth.
Excellent. Thank you for pushing his hand up. Okay, so test automation pyramid, as he correctly said, right, is, I think it was introduced by Mike Cohn in his book Succeeding with Agile. I think that's where it all started. And then a lot has been written and explored about this aspect. Martin Fowler has written about this. And there's a lot of reference that you will find around this, right? What it correctly means is that you have a lot of unit tests. Then you might have integration tests, JavaScript tests, Vue tests, web service tests, whatever different tests that make sense to your product, right? You would have that. And then you would also have your UI or functional test that is there. And these are all the tests that are automated. Apart from all these tests that are automated, you also have manual and or exploratory testing that is still required as part of it. Do we feel confident that without any exploratory testing, you can release a product? However, number of tests you might have. Maybe some teams, yes, depending on the context of the product again. But now you focus on, if you have good number of automated tests, you focus on the right type of exploratory testing, which is not covered as part of any of the automation. And this whole thing is what is telling you the quality of your product. Okay? So quality of a product is not just functional testing done or regression pass failed. And what does that mean? All these different types of testing done together and the result of those tells you what the quality of the product is. Okay? So very important. And why is this important? Because as the number of tests, as you go from bottom to top of the pyramid, the time to execute each test increases. At the same time, the cost of implementing and running these tests increases. And what this also signifies, as he correctly said, right? The number of tests decreases as you go up the pyramid. That's the ideal way. Why? Because on a developer machine, before doing a git push, I would be able to run all my thousands of unit tests within a few minutes on my machine before saying, yes, it's ready to go. But as you go up, I might need more and more of the product built and deployed or available to be able to do some other types of tests. So that's how the cost aspect and the time aspect goes up, right? The ability to get feedback quickly, it keeps on getting greater and greater after that. What the pyramid does not reflect very clearly is this inverted pyramid. Can anyone think about what that means? A unit test, the inverted pyramid represents the impact of the test on the product. A unit test impacts very granular piece of code. A particular method in a class out of the thousands of classes you might have in a product. You might have thousands of tests, but each test is having an impact on very granular aspects of the code. As you keep going up the automation pyramid, the impact of the test should also be appropriate. Unfortunately, what a lot of us end up doing, because we like, as QAs, like writing code, we like doing automation, we end up adding so many UI tests that they become very granular, which should ideally have been somewhere below in the pyramid. The UI test should impact the breadth of coverage of the product, and that's how you would get value. Okay? That's what the ideal pyramid signifies. And what also this means is, up to a certain level of the pyramid, so up to maybe Vue tests or JavaScript tests, these are technology-facing tests. The change done in the product to change a radio button to a drop-down or whatever that might really mean. These are technology-facing tests. But the ones on the top, these are business-facing tests. What is the impact of this test or scenario not working from a business value perspective? And that's what the focus needs to be. So as QAs, if we are focused on seeing if the drop-down has become a radio button or whatever that is, yes, it's good, but that is not the extent of what it needs to be. You need to think about why that change is required and what that impact is going to be. Okay? And what this really means is the value that each test really comes up with, the value of the test needs to keep growing. Okay? But now let's see reality. How many of us, everyone said they are doing automation in some way or the other on their teams. Right? You still remember that answer, right? We have a recording also of that. Are your teams following the test automation pyramid? Let's ask a simple question to get to that answer. Approximately how many unit tests would be there in your product? We have some developers in the room. How many unit tests in your team? 40% in terms of number?
Coverage good.
Sorry?
Coverage good.
No, coverage good. I'm talking about number of tests which gives that coverage. Few thousand.
1,000
Maybe 1,000, right? 1,000 unit tests are there. How many does your product, whoever is doing functional automation, how many tests would they have? Do you know? You don't have or you don't know? Oh, you don't know. That's a better problem. So first of all, as QAs, we need to understand where the quality is, right? How much of automation is done at which level. But as functional automation guys, how many tests do you have in your particular product? Example, throw out some numbers. 5, 10, 100, 1,000, 2,000. Anyone? How many tests do you have in your team? Functional tests, automated. Yeah.
I think
Yes.
currently it's about probably 20
20.
for UI.
Yes, for UI. Anyone has more than that? I think you guys don't have tests. Okay. So in reality, right, what happens is there is a pattern called ice cream cone anti-pattern, which Alistair Scott, I think he had come up with some time ago. The reality is that teams would have the same type of tests, but the number of tests is completely opposite of what it is ideally supposed to be. You have very less unit tests and a lot of UI tests on the top. This is one of the reasons why test automation also becomes unsuccessful practice. Right? As a result, your UI tests, you might have a lot of them, but they do not run reliably or they do not run quickly enough. As a result, what happens? You have to do more of manual and exploratory testing because the feedback is not correct. That is one pattern. The second one is called a dual test pyramid pattern. What that means, developers have their own automation, QAs have their own automation, but neither of them know what each other is doing. And why is that a problem? Because you might end up having a silo in the way of working, which means developers and QAs potentially have done some duplication of test automation. A bigger problem is there might be gaps in the implementation. You both would have missed out potentially some important scenarios or test cases to be automated, which is a bigger problem from the product perspective. Okay. There is also another anti-pattern which one thought worker have now come up with, Fabio. He came up with a cupcake anti-pattern. He apparently likes cakes. Okay. But what it means is there is one team developers who are doing their own automation. There is UI automation guys who are doing their own automation, and there is another set of team who is just doing testing. And there is no conversation, collaboration across them. Again, same problem amplified. Now there are 3 teams doing the same thing or similar things, right? Does the QA team need to do so much manual testing? If they knew what all was automated, this can reduce significantly. Right? You get the picture, right? What collaboration can do or you can get into if you don't have that. So these are different anti-patterns which make the teams really go slow and make test automation an unsuccessful practice as well. So a pyramid by definition, we know it's an equilateral triangle, right? Let's say for a particular team, we have got UI tests, integration tests, and unit tests. Just 3 types of tests that are there. Can anyone say what should be the percentage of UI to integration to unit tests? It's a trick question. There is no answer to it. It depends on the team that is working on the product and the team figuring out what type of pyramid really makes sense for them. Is 20 UI tests sufficient and 10,000 unit tests the right way to go? Or does it need to be 100 UI tests and 1,000 unit tests? Depending on the context of the product, the team needs to determine what it really means. So the pyramid in some cases might end up looking like a cylinder, or in some cases like the ice cream cone, which might be the right thing for the team given the context. There's no right or wrong. But you should very consciously be thinking about, if automation is going to make my team successful, how can I push as many tests down in the pyramid as possible, increase the unit test coverage, which will help the teams go faster. Okay, any questions? Any thoughts on the pyramid? Okay. Just a quick refresher on different types of automation frameworks that are evolution per se of the frameworks, right? There's modular, data-driven, keyword-driven, model-based, hybrid. Who knows what is going to be there in the future? Maybe we are already in the future and there's something else happening around that. Regardless of this, it does not matter what type of framework you use. Use the right tool set, the right technology to help the team move faster. That is what the objective should be. Okay. Another very important tip from my side, you need to really understand the system and the product that you need to test. Don't take a standard template and try to force fit into a new context from a testing or automation perspective. Otherwise, this is what you end up doing. You take a square peg or a square block trying to fit into a round hole. You are always going to need to compromise on what happens out of that. So fit for purpose is very essential to keep in mind. Okay. A lot of different aspects to think about when you're building automation frameworks. It has to be easy to use, maintainable, scalable. Browser device support has to be is important to be thought about. What type of reports or metrics you want to derive out of that is important to be thought about. Supporting different types of testing itself. If database connectivity is required, how are you going to incorporate that? Different environments that tests need to run in, dev environment, QA environment, UAT environment, pre-prod, prod, whatever that might mean. How are you going to manage that aspect? Also, this is very important. You should be able to run the test locally as well as remotely. Right? As a developer should be able to run the test on their local dev environment. And that should also be feasible because that is what is going to get quick feedback. Right? As well as I should be able to run a test with the environment deployed in some other, in the cloud or wherever as well. Your tools and technology need to support that aspect. That gives the teams a lot of flexibility. Okay. Parallel execution is very important because it's going to reduce the feedback time from the test execution that would be there. It has to support the features of the product, of course, under test. Otherwise, it's no use building a test framework or automation on top of certain such tool sets. The tool support becomes very important. How many of you use open source tools for automation? Why? Is it because it is free? Okay. How many of you use commercial tools? Okay. Which tool?
Yeah, XPUFT.
UFT. I'm sorry. But
beyond the tool support.
There is a proper evaluation that needs to be done. There's nothing wrong against commercial tools as long as it supports the needs of the team. Tools cannot be exclusive to certain set of people, which means because it is license based, I'm going to get license only for 2 QAs out of the 10 team member or team that I have, right? Everyone needs to have access to the tools and technology. Only then can they contribute to that aspect. And by everyone, I mean again devs and QAs together, not just QAs. Open source, because it's free, is a misnomer. There is nothing free in this world. It's true. There's nothing free. The cost of you guys working on the tool and constantly maintaining it, extending it, is a cost itself. It is not free. What reduces is the license fee that is there, but eventually you still need to end up doing the work. With a commercial tool, one big advantage is if there's some problem in the tool, you can point the gun to someone else. Fix this problem in the tool, I don't need to worry about it. With open source tools, you have a community support, or you need to take that extra step and investigate what is wrong in the tool, why it is not working, maybe put in a pull request, whatever, get it fixed, or create a patch on top of it and use it in that fashion. You need to spend more time on your own in that. Again, nothing right or wrong, depends on the context. Main thing is it has to be helpful and add value to the team. That is what is going to be important. You should not just use a tool because I've already paid for this license upfront and now let's just use it instead of using something else. Unfortunately, in many cases, that's what ends up happening. I already have an enterprise license of this tool set or technology stack, and we are just going to use that because we've already paid for it. Right? True story, right?
Not really.
You can tell me later. Okay. I'm generalizing certain aspects, but I hope you get the intent behind these statements, right? That choose wisely. It has to add value to the team, help the team move faster, and get quick feedback. Okay? And language tool restrictions. Don't use Selenium with Ruby if your team does not have Ruby expertise. Use Java or something. And it's obvious. Use a language which your developers will also be able to help contribute to. Why? Because you want them to be equal owners in the quality aspects, including automation as well. If you get stuck in something, developers are more proficient because they're day in, day out, they're writing code. They can help you write code better or implement fixes if required, in complex logic if required, on the automation side as well. But if it's a foreign tool, foreign language to them, they would not be able to help you as well. Right? So a lot of considerations to keep into mind when you start thinking about how are you going to build your test automation framework. Test automation framework can get really complex depending on the number of tests you end up implementing. And of course, it depends on the life of the product as well. So 20 tests might be sufficient. You might have it in a single class file for all you care. If you think that this product has a life of just 3 months or a short time span, right? But maybe if this product has a long shelf life, then you might want to organize your 20 tests into a better framework because the 20 might become 40 as well at certain point in time. So how do you really manage that code better to help in scaling, maintaining, and debugging issues as well? So to keep these aspects in mind. Okay. Certain principles that you have to think about when it comes to building or writing code from automation perspective is the code quality. Test code has to be of production quality. How many of you agree? No? So few? Okay. Test code has to be of production quality. That is wrong. Test code needs to be better than production quality because it is going to test production code. If you write bad tests, it is not going to help anyone. If you implement it using wrong or poor practices, then you will not be able to write more tests as things as the framework evolves, as you need to write more and more tests. If you write a test without any assertion, it is not going to help anyone because the test will just run and it will not give any feedback. I've seen cases where suddenly overnight the test coverage percentage went from 60% to 85% or something. And all the developer had done is spend the weekend writing stubs for that piece of code even without any assertions in it, without any code in it. But the code coverage tool is saying, yes, I have touched that piece of code. I hope that's not how the code coverage increases. Because it has to add value to the team, right? The purpose is not to increase coverage. It is to give confidence to the team that yes, if something changes which we are not aware of, that it should change, our test will tell us that feedback immediately. That is what we need to do. So it's very important. Code quality is very important. Test automation is a developer activity. It needs to think about understanding code, design patterns, object-oriented, whatever it really means, depending on the tech stack, of course. Understand it well, and then you can implement it better as well. Okay? So here's where collaboration techniques also would help. All those involved in automation, reach out to your developers, take help from them, ask them for a code review, for example, and they can tell you good inputs into how code can be made better from an automation perspective. You will learn a lot out of it. Your framework also becomes better. In the process, they will also understand some parts of test automation. It's a win-win situation. Okay. Design patterns, I already spoke about why that is very important. Abstraction layers, very important. Having everything in one class does not help anyone. How can you make sure as the product evolves or product changes, you have to make change in only one place in your framework instead of 10 different places, right? So abstraction layers becomes a very important aspect out of the design aspect. Headless execution, again, very important. I don't need to launch a browser every time a UI test needs to run. How can I run it in headless mode, which also means it will consume less memory, and I can have many more tests running in parallel at the same time as well. So that is very important. It has to be extensible, so write code in a way that you can easily add more tests and extend implementation of various different functionalities as well, automating the same. So that is very important. It definitely has to run via CI. Everyone knows what CI is, right? Yeah. So it has to run via CI. There has to be no one manually having to go and say, okay, now run the test. Does not help anyone. On every code change, we need to run all the different types of tests as possible. We should do that. I'm doing that currently for my Android build that is happening. Everything runs via CI, including unit test, building the APK, running my functional tests out of it, all happening via CI on real devices. It is possible. You have to put some effort, but it is possible. Have proper logging, because last thing you want to do is if a test fails, try and figure out why did it fail. So verbose logging in the test will help a lot. Understand if the test failed at what point and what really happened, which also means you need to take relevant screenshots, or better yet, do video recording of the test execution. If disk space is a concern, delete that video recording if the test has passed. But save it if the test has failed. So you can just replay the test, look at your logs, and figure out what really went wrong. Why did the test fail? Because so many times, especially in UI tests, we get intermittent test failures, right? You run it again and the test passes. But there's something hidden in that context why the test failed. And if we ignore that, then we have lost a big opportunity to build a quality product and prevent a defect going out to the user. Okay. Refactoring has to be a way of working when doing automation. To do that aspect. Evolve your framework, write intelligent tools and utilities in your framework which will help you move faster. And think about test data. Test data is very crucial. Each product has test data in a different way, has needs of test data in a different way. If you do not think about it in the beginning, it is going to be a problem at the end. You will not be able to test as much as you would have liked to. Okay. All these are very essential to think about before you start implementing your first test. But the key is to think about the big picture, but you start evolving. Take baby steps, start taking step by step, evolving towards that journey. And that will take you far. Okay? So I would like to end with Agile again. Why do we want to do Agile? What is Agile programming? Buzzword-driven development, whatever it really means. It's a very soft note to say, thank you very much for your time. And if any questions, you can talk about.
Thank you, Anand. So we covered a lot of things today, and I think we can summarize on what we have covered just now. So you started on discussing about principles and Agile, how it works in a day-to-day basis, as teams. You covered like 3 lives of QAs. And you jumped into discussing what are the career paths of QAs, and then jump into automation and the principles of test automation. So thank you again for covering all those and sharing your insights on those topics. Let's open for 5 questions tonight as we end our meetup today. So any questions from the audience?
Okay, hello sir. I want to asking about some way as the QA engineer, how to refactoring the tips or maybe some of insights based on your experience, how to refactoring the code we have mentioned before, and what's the maybe some best practice to do the is it already correct or not, or we can see the parameters for ourselves.
So sorry, are you talking about refactoring the code?
Yeah, to code automatically.
Okay, how to refactor?
Yeah, tips or else or based on your insight or experience.
Yeah. So there are 2 things that come straight to my mind for that, right? One, pair with experts. in coding, which would mean your developers in this context, right? Because they are writing code daily. They use design patterns and various tools very efficiently. So pairing with them, having them critique your code and telling you what needs to change and how, I think that would be the fastest way, right? That is one. Of course, when you refactor, it would mean before you refactor, your test is passing. After refactoring, again, it will pass. It's a very obvious thing that you need to look out for, right? The second thing is use good development tools. So for example, if you're using Eclipse or IntelliJ IDEA or anything, right? These tools are really great. Understand these tools in details because they will do a lot of work for you automatically. Okay, that is one other aspect. The third thing, which is very, very crucial as developers or QAs, we need to keep in mind, whether you're using Windows, then Control-C, Control-V should be disabled. If you're using a Mac, Command-C, Command-V needs to be disabled. Okay. Right? What that means is no copy-paste. What that would tell you to do, force you to do, is extract into helper methods whatever is required and reuse implementations instead of duplicating implementations. Okay? And that is very, very crucial. Even as a test, I just want to copy it and then I will refactor it. No, let me refactor as a part of doing this. And that is very crucial. And that is where, especially in test code, a lot of mess gets created. And likewise in development code also, if you are not aware of this, you'll end up creating so much spaghetti code, if-else blocks, such as copy pasting with small changes around. And that is a big problem. Okay? So I think these couple of things come straight to my mind from a refactoring perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Hello. Is there any specific industry where the agile testing doesn't work? Let's say we have been facing in the certain firmware industry where we need to develop also the hardware part of it. Sometimes it needs some manual testing, but a lot of it, let's say testing the electricity, the voltage, and so on. Is there anything? Is there any other field in which agile testing doesn't really work?
Agile testing in isolation will never work. There's a team that needs to be agile in the first place, right? Because it is product management, product owners, business analysts, devs, QAs, they all need to be bought into a way of working. And that's how the team will be able to deliver software. Agile or not, it depends on the context. So in some cases, hardware, or let's say airplane manufacturing, you can say they are working agile in a certain way or maybe not as well, right? Can you fly an aeroplane without certain parts of the aeroplane assembled or half the wing assembled? No. But can you assemble parts quickly and test it in isolation, which means you're getting quicker feedback on that aspect. So can I build my wing quickly and do wind tunnel tests or whatever else required on that alone without having the whole plane to be assembled? That is agile in a certain way, right? Getting quick feedback. So the value of agile is incremental software getting quick feedback. It potentially applies in any industry, potentially does not apply in some. I really would not know about that. Especially in the software context, in most cases it applies. It doesn't mean at the end of every iteration you have to release to production. It can still be an internal build which someone else is able to consume and look at. From a hardware context, I've never really worked on it, so I don't know if it works in that domain or not. But again, the principles, if you understand, then you can pick and choose the practices that will help deliver the value. So I don't have a very concrete answer in that particular. I think there was a question.
Yeah.
I'm not really questioning a question, but I just want to know about how your point of view in this problem that like maybe all of friends here experience it. So let's say that in one Scrum, so the team is already in the end phase, and
tomorrow is the release day, but the problem is the code is not done yet, and there is so much bug fixes, but we as a QA cannot test it and cannot mark it as done. So how your point of view about these problems?
Do not mark it done till it's done. It's as simple, right? And what it means is the velocity gets affected, for example, because the stories are not yet done. And then there will be a big UN cry, why did the velocity drop? And then in retrospective, you would say that the story was killed in dev on the last day of the sprint, right? That's what typically will happen. And it's okay. As QAs, we have to be very firm to our beliefs about saying, have I done the best possible on this? And I'm not going to be forced to close it regardless of whoever says what, because of just process or velocity or something, right? That is where metrics actually start affecting negatively. I have to keep my velocity up. We'll just close it and you test it on the first day of the sprint, next sprint, and it's fine, right? Never let those things happen because you have got a moral duty towards what value you're bringing to the table. If someone needs to do that still, you have to put your comments on the story card saying it is not yet done on last day of the sprint, and you are safeguarded in that sense. But that is one aspect. The second thing, how can you prevent such problems? I think there are various different techniques that can be used, right? If it is a 2-week sprint, maybe the practice on the team needs to be after the 7th day, no new story will get picked up for implementation. Devs will not pick up any new story for implementation. They will first see if there's any story that needs testing help. To help it complete faster, we will do that instead of picking up a new story. That potentially is one way. If the stories themselves are so big that it is taking almost the whole sprint or it's taking a long time, that's the reason why it got delayed. That's a learning for next time. How can you slice the story smaller so that you can test it faster as well? Dev and test it faster as well. Right? So various different techniques that would need to be employed in that aspect. But yes, it's a very classic and relevant problem I think everyone would go through. The code is not yet, rather the story is not yet dev complete to give sufficient time for QAs to test it well. It's a very typical problem, and we just need to see how we can avoid it, plan better, or tell the devs do not pick up a new story, help me test this first. Or worst case, it will not get done in that sprint, it will go in the next sprint. It's okay.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, one more aspect on that, right? It is very important to think about when you're planning the sprints of these aspects, right? If there are some stories which potentially might not get done, and if the team is in a habit of doing production deployments or releases at the end of the sprint, for example, right? Then you need to identify stories which potentially get picked up later if it needs to be as a feature toggle or something. Because the code might still be in the repository, it might not be usable, and if it is not tested well enough, it's not story done, then you need to toggle it off when that code goes live. The next sprint, you complete that aspect, switch off the toggle, and the code is live again. Right? So that's another aspect of looking at.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And then we have a question from one of our Zoom participants here.
Yep.
So here it is. If let's say a team already trying to do this agile model of testing, but it seems to not be working, what would you suggest for this team to do to get back to the right path? What would probably the first thing this team needs to work on to be on the right automation path? So you know how you covered the different automation paths, like the cupcake and I forgot the other ones. Ice cream cone and the pyramid. So what if one of those doesn't work? Like what would be like the first suggestions you would have or action item to take as a team? I think switch.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, but it cannot be an answer that is just given straight off. The biggest step in solving a problem is knowing what the problem is. And that is clearly what I think the question is reflecting, right? We know there is some problem and we acknowledge that it is not working well. Then in the context of the team, context of the product, a little more investigation would need to be done to see what practices, processes, tools are being followed, and what parts of that is not really working, contributing to the problem. And based on that, try incremental changes, how you can move to a better way. But other than that, without knowing more details, it is difficult to comment on exact concrete steps.
Right. It seems it's very team specific.
Completely. Yes.
So let's have one more question since we're wrapping up.
He's got the mic already.
Okay, what do you think about AI for automation tests? As a GA, do we need to worry about it, or do we need to learn more about AI for automation tests?
It's the latter. You get to learn more about it. Whatever said and done, AI, machine learning, these have been around for quite some time. The words probably have got more fancier. The implementations have got more complex and more realistic as well. Right? So it's not that these things did not exist in the past. Now they are more prevalent in the field. It's an opportunity for everyone to learn more about it and how they can contribute to it. So worry is for those who feel insecure about what value they bring to the table. In fact, with all these things, virtual reality, AI, machine learning, opportunities are increasing. Internet of Things, opportunities are increasing. There's so much more that can be done. And we need to find those opportunities that we spoke about the pendulum, right? Career path. Opportunities are increasing. We need to figure out what more can we do with them. So out of 17, 18 years that I've been doing I've been in the testing field, I have worked on various different types of products and projects, services, our product companies. But my list of things that I would want to learn or do more is ever growing. There's at no point saying that, okay, I've done this, now there's nothing more left for me to do. There's so much more for me to do. It's up to individuals to see how you really take that. So don't be scared. In fact, embrace that and see what more can you learn about that asset.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we're reaching to the end of this meetup. Can we give a round of applause for Anand?
Thank you again.